Electric cars are great, aren't they? They cost far less to run per year than other types of cars. You can fill them up while you sleep, if you have off-street parking and charging, and they help you avoid the long queues for the petrol station every few days. And thanks to the wonders of modern electronics and battery cell chemistry, most electric cars on sale today are capable of rapid charging at massive DC quick charging stations. You just turn up, plug in, activate the charging session, and 30 to 45 minutes later, your car is ready for another few hours of driving. It is so easy and reliable. Oh, it's broken. Yeah, that's not brilliant. While the number of Tesla and non-Tesla DC quick charging stations are on the rise across the world, as more funds are ploughed into charging provision by both public and private entities, the reliability of EV charging is starting to trend downward. Charging networks like Electrify America, Ionity, EVgo and others, whose multiple stall locations used to make me feel all warm and fuzzy about long-distance trips by EV thanks to the inherent redundancy they promised for the weary traveller, now fill me with a sense of dread thanks to poor network reliability, slow repairs, terrible apps, and a seemingly willful ignorance of the needs of electric car drivers. Although, as I just demonstrated on our 6-day towing trip from Seattle to Denver and back to Portland in my Ford F-150 Lightning, episode 1 is linked below, being a seasoned EV driver who knows how to check the reliability of the charging networks, doesn't often get range anxiety, and can navigate the sea of broken or very sickly charging stations to still get to where I need to go, means that my irritation with broken charging stations is unlikely to scupper a trip. But that is not true for the first-time EV owner. EV owners who may have just made a transition from gasoline, where pretty much every filling station has at least some way to get fuel out of the ground and into your car's fuel tank. EV owners who assume that the EV charging experience is just the same as gasoline. And EV owners who, as various new EV-owning vloggers are discovering, drive their cars to almost empty because they think the next charging station will work, leaving them stranded when it doesn't. Those are the EV owners who, I would hazard a guess, may even be tempted to go back to gasoline. That's right, it's no longer automakers and big oil who are killing the electric car, at least not directly, but the charging networks themselves. So today, we're going to look at the problem, examine some of the issues at hand, and ask, what can be done to fix it? Because, you know, I have ideas. First, though, a little history into DC quick charging. Then we'll talk about why these other charging networks are so abysmal. Up until 2009, the general concept of owning an electric car meant that you had to be content with the idea that stopping to recharge takes a long time on a long-distance trip. Sure, there were a few vehicles out there that could charge their battery packs up relatively quickly. The early Tesla Roadster had the capability to recharge its battery pack in a few hours from its custom-built AC charging station. There were a few super rare Toyota RAV4 EVs at the turn of the century that had rapid charging. And of course, the Mars 2 from the 1960s could use specially built rapid charging stations to recharge its battery pack in just 48 minutes. Those exceptions aside, though, it wasn't until the Mitsubishi i-MiEV launched in 2009, followed by the Nissan Leaf a year later, that we started to become accustomed to the concept that electric cars weren't just runabouts for city life, but that they could be used for long-distance trips as well, rapidly recharging every few hours to extend their range in a useful manner. Tesla cemented this idea in 2012 when its Model S was launched and the Supercharger network was born. Since then, Tesla has dominated the rapid charging experience, with its Supercharger network growing even larger, retaining an impressive uptime, and ensuring the customer experience was as high as possible at every turn. As we've covered plenty of times, however, Tesla's Supercharger network, in North America at least, uses its own proprietary charging connector, meaning non-Tesla EVs can't just rock up and suck on Elon's electrons. And while I'm going to stay out of the politics of whose charging connector is best and whose is worst, there is one thing I can say without a shadow of a doubt. Tesla wins when it comes to DC quick charging reliability, both in North America and in Europe, where it now uses the CCS charging standard that is mandated by European law. Why? Well, as I alluded to in this video, link in the description and maybe above if the cards are playing ball, Tesla's Supercharger network is a monopoly. Tesla controls every aspect of the charging experience for Tesla owners, from the design of the physical charging stations to the way each unit is constructed and deployed, to the way in which billing takes place. It is, for Tesla owners, a seamless experience because other than the protocol used to talk to the cars and the charging stations, which is based on an industry-wide standard, Tesla doesn't have to rely on anyone else for the bits and bobs needed to make the network do its job. And it's proving the same for European CCS superchargers. This is, of course, before you realise that Tesla's entire supercharger network is subsidised by every single person who buys a new Tesla. I'm not sure how much money from each Tesla sale actually goes towards the supercharger network because Tesla no longer has a press department that we can ask, but it is also worth noting that we do know, thanks to publicly available documentation, that Tesla's supercharger network costs far less to install and operates far more cheaply than rival rapid charging networks. And part of that is because Tesla has been able to optimize everything about its network for its cars. And now it's being able to optimize the CCS network and its smartphone app so that European customers can use Tesla's Supercharger network with nary a woe. Other networks, though, not so much. Electrify America and Ionity were both born out of Volkswagen's penance for Dieselgate. In the US, Electrify America was established essentially by court order and funded by the fines Volkswagen had to pay for cheating in emissions tests. While some automakers have and continue to make regular investments into the networks owned by EA, Ionity, and most other non-Tesla rapid charging networks, those networks also primarily rely on income from the charging sessions and you, as a customer, to keep themselves afloat. While they do also heavily rely on income from government grants, institutional investors, and, as I said, the rest of the auto industry, the real day-to-day money comes from charging you to charge your car. And this is very different to Tesla, which funds the hardware of the supercharger network from selling cars that work with it. Side note, you'll note that I said most because not all public charging networks run that way. ChargePoint is a good example of a slightly different business model. It sells its rapid and regular charging stations to businesses. The businesses then decide how much to charge people to use them, and then ChargePoint essentially charges the businesses in question a regular fee for the maintenance, upkeep, network connectivity, and everything else that keeps the charging station on its network and functional. And of course, I should also note there's Volta, which offsets the cost of its network by combining its charging stations with massive billboards that companies pay big bucks to advertise on. But I'm kind of digressing. Let's drill down to what's ultimately going to push people away from driving EVs. Abysmal DC quick charging reliability, and not much better level 2 charging reliability, which frankly is a symptom of the way these networks are funded, managed, and operated. Aside from the differences in how those networks are designed and funded when we look at Tesla, is the number of people involved in actually building the network and the hardware. At the core of the issue is the fact that these charging providers, with a few exceptions, don't actually make their own hardware. They purchase it from specialist suppliers. Those suppliers are either power electronics companies like ABB or they're startups who have decided to specialize in EV charging equipment. The charging networks pick a product that they think will work for them, work with their supplier to specify any customizations or communication requirements, and then hand over a blank check. If you're trying to establish a network quickly with limited funds for research and development, that method is frankly the easiest way to go. You get to keep your capital expenditures low while land grabbing all those sites you can. Simply put, when charging networks are funded by the electricity they sell to customers, backed up by grants and big cash injections, they're always going to be focused on increasing charging station deployments rather than ensuring reliability. Why? Because usually grant funds only go towards establishing and expanding the network, not keeping it running. Additionally, this business model doesn't hand off much autonomy to the networks for repairs. Not only do you have to rely on the original suppliers of those charging stations for parts and training for your engineers, but you also likely have to grin and bear it when there are glaringly poor design choices behind the units you've purchased, such as inadequate cooling, poor network connectivity, and frankly, the kind of computer hardware that would have best been left running Windows 2000 on a school library computer somewhere else. Ask Electrify America and other charging networks, and they'll tell you that their reliability issues right now are down to quote-unquote parts supply shortages. And in a way, they're right. In part. None of these companies appear to have enough parts in stock to actually fix the bloody issues with their charging equipment. In fact, some charging stations even appear to have major faults which can't be fixed and would just necessitate a replacement. But in order to repair or replace, those charging networks need service personnel, spare parts, and in many cases, brand new replacement units. Ongoing parts shortages do mean that those parts are taking months rather than weeks to arrive, and thus we are now seeing more broken units than usual. But stop. Because that's a terrible excuse. Supply chain problems are causing headaches across the entire auto industry and many other industries too. I mean, why isn't Tesla having them? Again, Tesla designs and builds its own network, and the engineers who work on the network are Tesla engineers. So these other networks are missing the benefit of building things yourself, because when you build and you control the hardware, you're more likely to have the parts on hand. You can more quickly redesign things when issues arise, and you can get first-hand diagnostics data when things start to go Pete-tong. So why aren't these networks keeping parts on hand? It is, after all, only good business practice. For example, last year when I broke this teleprompter glass, I ordered 2 spares so I would never be out of parts in the future if I was to break it again. We keep spare hard drives in our storeroom ready just in case something goes wrong with one of the ones that's in our servers. And when one of our cameras started to glitch a couple of weeks ago, requiring us to send it off for repair, I found myself digging out the company credit card and ordering a replacement before I sent the faulty one off to be fixed. So why aren't charging networks doing this? Honestly, I can't think of a good reason. Poor parts inventory is usually a sign of a poorly run business or a business that's running on incredibly thin margins. And with my kind hat on, one which I quite like wearing and I think looks good on me, I would mutter something about how everyone is suffering right now and nobody is completely immune to supply chain woes. I mean, even we are finding consumables that were once easy to get next day are taking 1, 2, or 3 weeks to arrive. But Electrify America and other networks around the world are continuing to install new charging stations at new locations. We keep getting press releases about them, rather than focusing on keeping the units they already have on the ground functional. But remember, that's all to do with funding, I think. And while there are huge chunks of the US East Coast and US West Coast that, for example, have enough redundancy and enough functional charging stations so that down charging stations and sites aren't a big issue because you can just skip on to the next one 20 minutes down the road, there are other parts where a down charging station could quite easily strand someone who is new to EV ownership, or indeed happens to be towing. At this point, I do think it's important to note that I've reached out to Electrify America for a video interview, and I've been offered, at this time, a telephone one, and we pushed back because, well, I know you don't want to stare at me talking to someone on the telephone, even if we have actually done it on the channel once or twice for comedic effect. I hope that EA and other networks agree to sit down and let us film something. So, EA, let's make this happen. And any other network I've just mentioned, if you would like to explain why your charging networks are suffering terribly right now, we are all ears. A lot of heat problems seem to be present across North America and Europe, and we want you to be able to fairly explain what's been going on and tell us how you're going to fix it. Without a concerted effort, we are about to enter a troubling part of the EV future. I don't believe, personally, that adopting Tesla's standard, for example, will solve the issues we're detailing above. In fact, I don't think that public charging should be offered by one company. That would lead us to a monopolistic future where customers ultimately can be taken advantage of. When Tesla adopts CCS in North America, though, well, I think that's also going to light a fire up someone's butt. At the same time, I think it's important that stakeholders, especially those holding purse strings, require all networks that receive funding achieve the same kind of uptime that we come to expect from gas stations. That those companies have enough parts on hand at local warehouses and enough trained staff ready to fix broken equipment no more than a day or so after they break. Not weeks, or even months. And we, as EV drivers, need to hold those companies accountable when they screw up. We need to praise them when they get it right, and make it blatantly clear that without reliable charging, it doesn't matter how many tax incentives we offer people for dumping the pump, because they won't drive electric if they can't reliably charge. One final thought? It's the one that, frankly, I think should put the fear of God into current charging networks. Because if they don't get things right soon, big oil will. See, gas stations don't need to make money off EV charging. They don't make money from gasoline today. They actually make money from selling you snacks and drinks from the convenience store attached to a gas station. And if all of those companies go all in on charging, which Shell and some others are beginning to do, they will ultimately offer lower pricing than the competition, have more money on hand to spend on keeping their equipment running, while still remaining profitable, all while using prime locations they already operate from and everyone knows how to locate. That should frankly scare everyone out there. That should frankly scare every other charging network out there except Tesla into pulling their fingers out. What say you? That's it for today. If you like the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and sharing it with your friends. And if you really like this video, why not leave us a super thanks? It is easy to do, and everything you send our way goes towards helping us make great content. If you haven't already, do make sure you subscribe to this channel and our other channel, Transport Evolved Take 2, and give that bell a gentle ding to be told when our next video goes live. Thanks on behalf of the entire crew go out to everyone who makes this channel possible. That includes everyone who supports us on Patreon and YouTube, as well as those of you who watch the video and share it around. If you are a supporter at the charged up level, you'll see your name right here on my right hand side. And if you've just joined and you don't see your name, don't worry, it will join the list very soon. Sometimes our videos are produced a few weeks or days in advance, so your name may not show up immediately. Thanks to our self-driving tier supporters, Chris Maxwell, Pedro Mio Pinheiro, Patrick Boyaski, Bennett Elder, Brian Newton, Dave Kitchen, Michael Goad, Ricky Leon, Andrew Martin, Guido Drahota, Brophy Wolf, Tazla in the Gong, Gordon C, Stephen O'Donoghue, Carl Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Regine Fellows, Dan Blair, Jim Burness, Chris Asenta, Chris and Michael Johnson, Peter Dillinger and Denny Hyde, and of course, super out of this world thanks to our Starman level supporters, Anonymous Freak, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, Rory Litwin, Joe Bresney, Reed R, JP Fagerback, Russ, Will Graylin, Matthew Drobnak, Kevin Burrowbridge, John Lyons, Andrew Glenn, Paul Conway, Laura Reynolds, and Ian. If you would like to be part of that amazing list, you can join Patreon at the link below. You can hit the join button to support us on YouTube, or you can show us your support through Bitcoin, Ko-fi, or our cool swag store. Buy a t-shirt like this one. And if you are unable to support us financially, please know that watching this video and sharing it really makes a big difference. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!